As the year 2023 begins with high hopes and optimism, economic cheers is scarce on the ground amid the darkening economic outlook marked by the imminent recession and persistent inflation. According to the International Monetary Fund, the world's economy is in for a tougher year as it projects one-third of the globe will slide into recession, as global GDP growth will decline to 2.7% in 2023, down from 3.2%, making it the slowest rate in the past 20 years, apart from the global financial crisis in 2019, 2009, and initial COVID shock in 2020. Managing Director of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva, who disclosed this, in an interview with an international platform, noted that economic activities in the United States, the European Union, and China are also slowing simultaneously. To give us more insight into the prospects and challenges of the global economy in the year 2023, I'm being joined via Zoom again by a friend of the house, is a partner and a senior economist at SPM Professionals, Mr. Paul Alaje. Compliments of the season. Happy New Year to you, Mr. Alaje. It's really good to see you.
Happy New Year to you. Thank you so very much for having me.
Mr. Paul, I know that you're aware of this report, but I don't know how worried you are. There's two things to read this report, understand it, and be worried about it. The IMF is saying that a third of the global economy will face recession this year. What do you make of this, or was this expected, considering what has happened from COVID to Russia and Ukraine crisis, and as we speak, there seems to be no end to some of the challenges we face globally?
Well, first, Happy New Year. And second, it's a year that will define a lot of things around the world. Recall that 2022, American economy faced a number of challenges, but the labor market in America continued to post strength to show that it has a resilience against a lot of pressure. So that is good news, not just for America, but for the entire world. But it's not the same for China. As China economy continues to battle with COVID, government in 2022 made a policy of zero COVID in China. That led to lockdown. You know, when there is lockdown, there is both demand shocks and supply shocks. Most countries in the world depend on China for supply, and they are part of their supply chain. When there is disruption in supply chain and it goes on for a long time, it has implications on the entire economy. For Nigeria and the rest of Africa, that depends on Russia and Ukraine for some inputs, in some cases for final produce, it has tremendous impact on our commodity prices, which of course eventually led to high inflation, contributed to high inflation from Ghana at double digits, even far higher than Nigeria, to South Africa, to Egypt, and even to Nigeria, where we are witnessing unprecedented inflation across the sub-Saharan Africa, or maybe I should properly speak, across the entire Africa continent. That is not the only part. There seems to be a Cold War, if you like, between the Western Europe and Eastern Europe because of the crisis going on between Ukraine and Russia. This war has taken several turns. For instance, Russia for some time stopped selling gas, which of course had tremendous implications to the economy of Western Europe. And Germany is not sufficient to cater for the demand that is coming from that region. And Russia knows that it is very necessary in some of the economies around Europe. So Eurozone is having significant reduction. I mean, maybe I should say the entire Europe, the European continent is having economic slowdown. This is extending to China and America, which is giving a bit of hope to the entire world. If you check Africa, even though Africa is posting some positive signs, but when you look at the number of people becoming poor in Africa, it's actually increasing. According to one of the agencies of the United Nations, Nigeria posted 133 million people with 133% of unemployment, with youth unemployment even growing more, and over 21% inflation rate. It is not well in most African nations. Nigeria is even among the places that you can say the economy is performing relatively better than others. But of course, the companion of fools shall be destroyed. So many African nations is facing a lot of challenges, partly because of what is going on in Ukraine, Russia, also because of the economic situation in Europe, and more importantly, what is going on in America and China around the world today.
Indeed, there is that slowdown with regards to what is happening across our board, especially in China, where the government seems to have dropped the containment policy. But China, anything that happens around China, European Union, and of course, United States of America, purely must affect us as African countries one way or the other. Now, if this continues and this shock continues, let's look at the effects now. Can we highlight the effects on Nigeria's economy? A country that is struggling and, of course, moves towards an election. What do you think all of this global issues that we have no control over, how would it impact us?
So first, Nigeria is dependent on oil. Oil is one of the major contributors to government revenue. You could see that even when the National Assembly was going to increase the budget by over 1 trillion naira, what they did was to manipulate what they thought Nigeria should use as the benchmark for oil, and also what the sales price should be and exchange rate. When they manipulated the three, a figure showed up, which is over 1 trillion, which is now added to over 20 trillion we had, to give us over 21 trillion in the expenditure. And that also had from 8 trillion naira government had projected, or 9 trillion to nearly 11 trillion naira. Government is now expecting as revenue from 2023 budget. So oil is very significant. When there is crisis around the world, where industry are not consuming our crude, or that of crude coming from different parts of the world, from Saudi Arabia to the rest of the world, is going to have negative impact in prices. Because when the demand slows down and supply remains the same, then you are going to have challenge of price. If both slows down, you will still have challenge of price and output. But in this case, both are slow. Demand seems to slow down because factories are not open, demand is not happening, and if you need to have reduction in supply at the same time, so that you hope you have some things working out. But when both slows are at the same time, then you will have a bigger issue to worry on in the long run. Two, most African countries are consuming nation. We are consuming nations. We don't produce sufficiently. When you look at the manufacturing component of our GDP, is less than 30%, especially for Nigeria, that need less than 40%, even increase to 50%, because we have the largest population in our continent. But our manufacturing component is less than 40%. Agriculture is more than manufacturing. It's a lot for us to worry about. So those that are manufacturing for us, when the economy is faced with challenges, and we need to spend the US dollars to import, then we have a lot to worry with. You've seen what the exchange rate was when we're beginning the year, both our official rate and parallel market. Today, the story is not the same, as official has increased to over 450 naira to $1, and parallel market has since increased, and I think right now is a bit below 450 naira to the dollar. So a lot where we need to worry about regarding what the exchange rates are across market. So we need to look for more naira to buy. For instance, you want to buy a tie. And that tie, formerly you were buying it at, say, 500 naira. Now, you need to look for 750 naira because of exchange rate. The cost of tie could be $1 for the sake of this conversation. Meanwhile, your income has not increased. That means if you're earning 1,000 naira and you're spending 50% of your income to buy tie, now if tie is very compulsory to your livelihood, then you now spend 75% of your income. So what happens to food? What happens to transport? These are real issues. That is why more people are going into poverty in Africa, because inflation is the higher inflation figure is, the higher the tendency of more people in a country becoming poor. And I just demonstrated the example for you. So whatever is happening in those regions, because our continent, and most especially our country, is not independent. The globe is interdependent. Unfortunately for ours, we are even dependent on other countries, not just interdependent, but independent. We are dependent on other countries for some critical things that we could have done for ourselves. For instance, PMS, you have seen that most of the time when we export crude, NNPC pay subsidy, sometimes NNPC do swap, and so on and so forth. All of these are not making our economy to grow and for us to have the kind of effects that we need for the growth and the development of our country.
Let's talk about trade, which you've talked about. Now, I see that if we trade within ourselves, across the African continent. We can address some of these challenges coming from the West. Do you think that the AfCFTA can help in any way? And I don't see us even, are we taking advantage of it at the moment? I just hear a lot of meetings and meetings and meetings where other countries have started taking place or taking their place in what AfCFTA holds for them. What is happening to us?
Well, you see, AfCFTA is a very important program across African nations. We all hope that AfCFTA would have started. We have some level of production from agriculture to service to manufacturing that is happening that Africa could exchange amongst African countries instead of importing such. But for some reasons, because of a lot of challenges that we have as African, we are all in the same continent, but we are never connected. It may take someone to fly from one country to another. Meanwhile, if you go to some European countries, there are other means of connection. I think African leaders need to deal with the issue of logistics, which is the issue of movement of goods, because this is an economic policy. How do we move goods and labor cheaper, better, and faster? By collapsing borderlines across African continent. You know, Africa, the Europeans and Americans seems to have known that for you to expose your markets to a nation, you need to make the border policies favorable to your producers in their country. And this is what they have achieved over time. Now it's time for Africa to expose Africans to African market. Is it becoming a lot challenging? That is why policy review and so on and so forth is what we have seen more in the case of African Continental Free Trade area agreement. Unfortunately, till now, we have not really seen a significant amount of that transaction happening or going on among countries. So if you ask me, I would say that African leaders need to do a quick review and see how all of these can start happening without wasting time, because it will save us a lot of FX pressure that we have that is happening among African countries. Again, Africa could also help, African leaders could also help to look at countries with competitive cost advantage and see how we can leverage on those so that we can improve on our exports, we can improve on our currencies, we can also improve on our economic growth.
Mr. Paul, before I'll let you go, tough times ahead is what the IMF is saying, and that's what we started this conversation with. But in your thoughts, what can be done? I don't want to say to salvage the situation, but it shouldn't be as bad as expected. Since we have warnings, beforehand, do you think that anything can be done very quickly, at least to reduce the negative effects of all of this that is expected, considering the realities on ground?
The truth is that the impact of the incoming crisis in a matter of months will be felt by all nations, but the impact will vary from country to country. World Bank earlier, late last year, had issued a report, which I may want to call warning to Nigeria, and he called it Nigerian choice. The choice resides with our leaders and those that are making economic policy for us, whether we should continue to have refineries that are dysfunctional and not refine crude from it, or we should support private refinery to come mainstream so that we can reduce pressure that is going to our foreign reserve. That's on one hand. On the second hand, we also need to ask questions as to why we are spending over 3 trillion naira from our budgets that we're going to borrow almost half. But 3 trillion naira will go into a subsidy. And that subsidy is not for a whole year, it's for half year. Whether it's also whether it makes economic sense for us to spend over 6.5 trillion naira, not to pay back debt, but to service debt. Again, we still have to borrow more in that regard. I tell you, we need to start with our biggest fiscal document, which is our budget. And I hope that those that are leading us, we do a review of some of the things that are keeping our hands and legs in shackles, in economic shackles, because the road ahead is tough. It may be tougher than 2015, 2016, and in some cases, even tougher than the recession that was witnessed by many nations in 2020. You have seen what happened in Sri Lanka. where buying things became relatively tougher. I'm not saying Nigeria's situation will get to that, but we need to take decision on time before it is too late.
Well, I must thank you so much for your time there. Always interesting talking to you, Mr. Paul Alaje. He is a partner and a senior economist at the SPM Professionals. I thank you so much. Do have a productive and profitable 2023.
Thank you so very much for having me. Happy New Year once again.